Welcome, friends, to this digital iteration of Opera America's Onstage series. I'm Mark Skorka, president of Opera America, and we continue to work remotely. But as in so many ways, Zoom has given us a wonderful opportunity to convene experts from across the country and share images that will enrich our conversation. In this time of uncertainty and experimentation, we're delighted to explore a few noteworthy projects that have demonstrated our field's ability to reinvent the opera experience, to adjust to current times, and frankly, perhaps to introduce a new dimension to our interaction with audiences. My esteemed colleague, Everett, Opera America's Chief Programs Officer, will introduce and facilitate this demonstration discussion. She's an opera production expert and has great questions for our special guests. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here with you this evening. Opera companies are founded on the mission to provide great arts and entertainment, while also being functional businesses in your communities. This year's challenges for the performing arts have been like nothing we have ever experienced on all fronts. But as we know, necessity is the mother of invention. Tonight, we're going to pull back the curtain with three general directors from across the country who have taken on what may have seemed like the impossible, producing live events in the middle of a global pandemic. And they're going to share with us how they did it. Our panelists this evening, which I'm thrilled to introduce to you, are Julia Noulin-Mérat, recently appointed general director for Opera Columbus, who previously was working with Boston Lyric Opera on their Opera Street Stage project and with the Atlanta Opera on their tent performances. Tomer Zvulen, the Carl W. Knobloch Jr. General and Artistic Director for the Atlanta Opera, who will talk about their fall festival season that was done outdoors. And David Bennett, General Director for the San Diego Opera and the Drive-In La Bohème. We have some images to share with you from these productions, and I'm going to ask some questions to get each panelist started and welcome your questions and curiosity. And now I'd like to welcome Julia Noula-Mérat. Julia was recently appointed the General Director for Opera Columbus, was previously with Boston Lyric Opera, and was also a consultant on the Atlanta Opera's tent project. Hi, Julia.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to share both experiences with you.
Awesome. I'm really glad that you're able to do that, especially since Julia is so newly minted as General Director. When did you start?
I started last week, so I definitely felt this was worth making the time and getting to know everyone. So thank you.
Excellent. Absolutely. Well, congratulations. So the project that we want to ask you most about at this moment is the Boston Lyric Opera Street Stage. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that. What was the immediate motivation for implementation of this project?
Yes, absolutely. So I think when the pandemic started, we've all seen online a lot of artists performing either from their homes, from gardens, and inviting their neighbors. And I think what this pandemic has also done is kind of allowed us to re-explore our relationship with our audience and what opera means to each and every one of us. And the truck and the outdoor stage kind of grew out of that idea and this necessity to actually be able to present opera but still have an audience. So in sharing some of these images, one of the things that we felt was also important was to engage our community. So we've had for now 8 years a partner called Artists for Humanity. And there are teens, artists who actually also help and create opera. So they're the ones who decorated our truck. So this was a prefab truck that we kind of transformed a little bit for our performances. So going through some of these images, you can kind of see, so this is the trailer as it comes, as it pulls in the parking lot, if you will. And this was our first presentation at the Museum of Fine Arts. And so now you can see it, I call it deployed because all the different panels raises up. And it's been outfitted so that what was important for us was not just for our live audience that would come and see the performances, but also our audience at home. So we needed to be able to live stream those performances. So it was outfitted with microphones. So not just to capture the beautiful sound we were creating, but also the beautiful sound we were creating together with our audience. So we would also relaying the applauses that you would hear. So that was important to us. And if you can see other images. So this is one, she was Chelsea was a former emerging artist with us and now is a performer with Boston Lyric Opera. But this was one of her test runs, if you will. So she had, if you know a little bit on the technical side, she was also wearing a microphone on herself as well. And you kind of can see it deployed fully in action. And then something that I also wanted to share with you was kind of a little bit, because something that's very unique with this, as we know, each state has different requirements for live performances. So we were only able to have 50 guests to join us. And one of the things that we did to really indicate clearly in terms of social distancing, the placement is we would drop hula hoops on the ground to kind of show our patrons where to go. And we very clearly would delineate how to get to each hoop as well. So it's been a fantastic experience because we got to hear music live. And I think it's truly a great example of really adapting to our circumstances, but still producing incredible work. So
that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
And I am sure there was great entertainment in
Yes.
purchasing how many hula hoops in one batch?
50, so yeah.
I'm sure Amazon has had stranger orders.
Yes.
So how many times did you all deploy the truck?
So we had 3 performances, but we, as we know, there's also the weather element that we have to deal with. So we are now looking forward to deploying more in the spring. So
excellent. Yeah. So did you have to find new contractors, new partners? I mean,
yes.
this is not like walking into a theater and doing what we know how to do. So, you know, what were the unique elements that were surprises about doing opera in a truck?
Absolutely. So one of the things was because also the city of Boston doesn't know fully how to label it. So one of the things was, how do we become ADA compliant? And also in terms of permitting, are we considered a temporary event or is it a permanent building? So we were still trying to figure that out. One thing that we learned, which we had to be very strategic about, was also how to run power to our truck, because if we actually plug it into a building, then we become a building ourselves. And we can't have the generator, like a massive generator that we would need to power this, because it would create sound. So it's kind of been a lot of learning steps throughout the way.
I was going to ask that was my next question is, so what was the learning curve for the staff and who was involved? You know, was it just production staff or was the entire BLO staff involved in this? Did you have to contract with some outside folks who dealt with the technology for the capture or the broadcast? Tell us a little more about that.
Yes, so we actually did have to, we had new contractors involved. We also were repurposing a truck that was not designed to always have its flaps open. So we've had to, with our team on the production side of things, kind of re-engineer some of that as well. And thankfully, our technical director on this project, who also has worked a lot in Atlanta, she builds a lot of RV homes. So she was very smart into kind of figuring out ways to have a generator without it being a generator. So she was really good at kind of rewiring electricity, if you will.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Electrical contracting, not something we all naturally come with in the world of opera.
No, absolutely.
So from your perspective, what were the most challenging aspects of this project?
I would say, one, it takes a lot more money than any of us would ever anticipate, because there is such a learning curve too, right? And I would say also one of the things that was very important was to be transparent with the audience in terms of what is the safety protocol, what are they also expected as participants of the live event. So in terms of temperature check, as well as surveys and things like that. So
Yeah.
we also had to learn that together as a community.
Right, that which has become so much a part of what we've been talking about as we look at reopening even.
Yes.
What was the audience reaction?
They loved it. I think they wanted more of it, and that's something we're trying. I mean, that BLO is trying to work really hard on, is how we can have more of it. What was important for us is also to be able to offer it. What the online portion did was able to kind of expand our audience, but the live component, because everyone is so hungry to hear live music, it's really hard to actually turn people away as well. So we kind of have to, it almost feels like a pop-up event. We can't really advertise it as well because we would very quickly fill the 50 seats.
Yeah, and it seems so heartbreaking to turn people away at this
Yes.
moment when everyone craves it so much.
Absolutely.
Someone has asked a question, which was also part of my round of next questions, is how do you think it can be adapted post-COVID? Will you use this after the pandemic? You've obviously got plans to use it again this spring when there's
Yeah.
not, how many feet of snow did they get in Boston in the last 2 days?
18
But for either outreach or some of your community engagement or general audience engagement, do you think this is something that will become a part of what they do in Boston from here forward?
Most definitely. I mean, it's an investment, but it's also, I think what we discovered is how much we were enjoying it as well. So for us, that can become something more into a summer series or whatnot. But it's definitely something that can become very easily long-term if you're looking to invest into a project like this.
Excellent. Arlene just asked a great question, which I did not have on my list, which is, what was it that you performed? Were they scenes? Were they arias? Was it concert opera? How many singers did you use?
So it was concert operas, and that's a great question. So right now, the way the truck is structured, socially distant, we can only have 2 singers and a piano. And so right now, unless it was a one person opera or one act, it is purely concert at this time. But
Okay.
what I love about this is long term, once we can be closer, then we can actually develop into something.
Yeah.
bigger.
No, that's great. That's
Yeah.
great. If there was one thing that you wanted to emphasize for other producers, if they were going to assess a project like this, like having now done it, what's your short-term and long-term view of the value of it and the cost benefit for you as a producing member of your community?
Absolutely. So I think this is something, when you go into this endeavor, it is something you want to do for your community. It is not something that you will generate income with, especially right now. So in terms of being able to have an offering for your audience, people are very excited and will come there. But in terms of actually bringing in a revenue, I would not count on that. So yeah.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. This has
Thank
been
you.
fascinating. And if we've got other questions, we will pull you back in for this discussion. But I really appreciate it and look forward to seeing what you do with things like this in Columbus.
Yes. Thank you.
Awesome. So now we're going to go to the other end of the East Coast and welcome our friend and colleague, Tomer Zvulen from Atlanta Opera. So Tomer, hang on, we have to get Tomer on the screen. There he is.
Hi.
Tell us about your opera tent project.
So as the pandemic hit, we decided to perform in a circus tent, and we chose 2 productions that we felt were very fitting for the time and for a circus tent, and those were Pagliacci and KAISER from Atlantis. And we launched this crazy initiative, and here we are.
Awesome. I know we've got some you've got some wonderful imagery to go along with this. So so what was your immediate motivation? You sort of addressed that in terms of why you decided to do this. So how was this idea conceived and then developed?
Right. So the pandemic hits, and the board of directors is meeting with the senior management, and we're basically asking ourselves the same question that every organization in the country, whether non-for-profit or not, is asking, and that's, what are we going to do? And so we really had two big options ahead of us. One was to hibernate for who knows how long, because nobody knew at that point how long it's going to take. The other one was to turn the opera on its head and to come up with some ideas that will be outside of the box with the strategic thinking of what can those competencies that we will create during the pandemic would look like after the pandemic is over. So as we started to answer those questions, we decided, as I mentioned, to do that in a circus tent. And one thing that was super clear from the very beginning of the pandemic is that being outdoors is safer than being indoors, that you can't perform indoors. And so we basically bought this huge circus tent, 120 by 60. In normal situation, it can seat 500 people. And with social distancing, because we created a pod system, it can seat anywhere between 200 and 250 max people. And that was solution number one, was to perform outdoors in a safe way. Solution number two was to think about the people that will be involved in the productions. And so the opera company created an initiative that we call the Atlanta Opera Company Players. And that is basically those amazing singers that you see on the screen that make their home in Atlanta or around Atlanta. Singers like Jamie Barton, Morris Robinson, Ryan McKinney, Alex Schrader, Daniela Mack, Mike Mays, Meg Marino, Trey Smeger, et cetera, and they're with us for the whole season, doing some of our production, doing concerts, doing social media with us. We pay them benefits, we pay them a stipend, and when they perform, they get performance fees. So that was the second initiative. And the third initiative that we wanted to create as a competency that will service both during the pandemic and more importantly afterwards was the digital media competency. So we invested in purchasing equipment, in hiring a team of fantastic filmmakers, and creating a green screen at the Atlanta Opera Studio so that we can make movies in case people won't be able to come and see them.
So obviously, you had to find new people to collaborate with on all of this. You've just shown us digital media, coming up with the outdoor space. The people are all people I think you knew and are familiar in your neighborhood. But so who are some of the newer partners, either to provide materials or technical expertise? Certainly the digital media piece is sort of new for everybody. Who'd you partner with?
So the guy in the picture there is one of the most brilliant discoveries for us. His name is Felipe Barral. Atlanta is the home of CNN as well. He's formerly of CNN. He's been working with us for a couple of years. As soon as this crisis hit us, we had to make some painful decisions about staff, about salaries. We had to make some cuts. But the one thing that we added was we added Felipe and created a team around him so that we can really focus on the digital component of this. The second partners that we had, that we knew from before, but we really forged a fantastic partnership, is Oglethorpe University. The baseball field that we performed in is a part of Oglethorpe University, and working with them has been fantastic. And the third partner consulting company that we never knew of before was the Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival. As you decide to perform outdoors, which is not within our normal range of things to do in an opera company, there are a lot of obstacles, and I think we can touch a couple of those challenges very soon in this conversation. But we had some serious discussions with the team at the Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival, and they made some really good points as we launched this whole crazy initiative.
Oh, they sound like fantastic partners for stepping into this and helping with the learning. So what was the learning curve for your staff? And which staff had to field that in moving outdoors and taking this on?
So it was a huge learning curve for everybody on staff. So if you look at the lower part of this, you can see the orchestra. The orchestra is separated by plexiglass. If they're not playing the horns, then they have masks on if they play violin or viola or instruments like that. The staff was working outside, outdoors. So we had to build a new front of house competency. The chorus, right? Pagliacci has a chorus. We can't have a chorus. So the chorus had to be piped into it in a Zoom canned recording. And you can see it also in the lower image. You can see the chorus appearing in a Zoom over Canio. So there was a huge learning curve on multiple levels for the staff, for the orchestra, for front of house, for the technical department, obviously. And I think that, you know, the learning curve is something that will be softened and mitigated as you repeat something like that. The first time you do something, it's a huge learning curve. And basically we created this prototype that now we can repeat and figure out a way to make it more efficient and profitable. And we look forward to it. We are planning currently our spring festival that includes 2 world premieres of very familiar operas, Three Penny Opera and Three Penny Carmen. We're taking those 2 operas and stripping them from grand opera elements so that we can fit them into a pandemic world.
Fantastic. Mark's got a question, so we're going to bring him on screen to do that. Todd Calvin also asked the question, was the chorus live or recorded?
Yeah, the chorus was recorded.
Okay, so not live and piped in, but recorded.
Recorded, which is, by the way, live and piped in is a nightmare of a different monumental proportions.
For sure.
There was some monumental proportions to canning them, and having a conductor listening to a track while conducting a live orchestra and trying to connect with the singers that are in the other tent, because the orchestra was separated from the performance tent.
Oh my gosh.
Thanks, Howard. Good to see you. Does this mean, because I hear you planning your spring season and talking about how the learning curve is flattened over time when people do it again and again, is this tent iteration of Atlanta Opera going to be something that continues even after you're back in your home theater?
That is a question that will get different answers depending on who you ask. If you ask some of my donors that are very excited about the tent and just love the experience of being outside, they will say definitely yes. If you ask my director of production, if we ever going to do this again, you will receive the answer, absolutely not. On my dead body, I'm not performing outdoors anymore.
So what if we ask you?
I think that it depends. I think that if we need to pivot, we know how to do that. And I think that when you finish with a project that was very difficult, when you're in a very difficult time, it's hard to think about repeating whatever difficult thing it is that you did. But as time goes by, you become nostalgic about the most difficult things. And I have a feeling we'll become nostalgic for this.
Yeah.
Great answer. Thank you.
Thank you for hopping in for that, Mark. I'm gonna roll to why it is exactly that your director of production said over his dead body. So what were the most challenging aspects of this project, and what should people understand about the difficulty of this?
So we have until 7 p.m. or 7 p.m. tomorrow.
Exactly. Right.
So you know, there's a lot of challenges, and we have included some of the challenges that we've encountered. And I would say that there are really 3 big categories of challenges when you perform in a pandemic. The first one is a safety. And so we've created 47 pages of safety protocols that were worked out by Carlos Del Rio, this amazing epidemiologist that is working with us and with our safety committee. And it includes a very rigorous way of making sure that we create what Carlos Del Rio refers to as layers of Swiss cheese. And the idea behind layers of Swiss cheese is that if you find redundant ways to try to prevent an outbreak, you will very likely be successful. So for example, if you have singers with masks on, and you have vinyl dividers that separate singers from the audience, if you have audience divided via pods, if you take precautions of taking temperature before the show starts and the audience is coming in, you have surveys, you test your singers and your orchestra every week. You create those redundancies that are like layers of Swiss cheese, and that's the safety challenges. And the thing about the pandemic is that it was moving and breathing. It changed every day.
Yeah.
And we had to be on our toes the whole time. So number one was safety. Number two was sound. Performing in a baseball field is not performing in an opera house. Singers were mic'd. The orchestra was reduced because you don't want to have a Pagliacci orchestra of 60 in a pandemic, so you had an orchestra of 10. And so sound competing with airplanes, we discovered that we were not too far from an airport. MARTA train. Other challenges are in a baseball field. Sometimes irrigation is tricky.
Yeah.
So mud became a very good friend of our set director of production. So, and that leads us to the third challenge, which is weather. And you know, Atlanta, you think of Atlanta as mild, right? You're in the middle of this 30 inches snow right now. I had to wear a coat for the first time in Atlanta this morning because the weather is so nice, but you don't know what the weather will bring you. And what we encountered this fall was unbelievable. We had a full hurricane. You can see some of the pictures of what happened to the orchestra tent when the hurricane hit us. And there were so many damages. But what was really tremendous, what was really superb, was that it created a feeling in the staff, in our trustees, in our audience, in our singers, in our company, an ethos, a certain ethos of the show must go on.
Mhm.
And it was echoed by the pieces that we did artistically. It was Pagliacci, which is a show about a circus, and a circus is all about the show must go on.
Yeah.
And Kaiser from Atlantis, a piece that was written in the Holocaust with people in the camps performing despite Nazi Germany over their head. So there was a certain ethos that I think was very, very valuable for our company.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You just hit on something that Janet has asked as a question is, how do you take unique advantage of the circus tent to bring a fresh approach to Pagliacci? You want to say a
Well, I
little
mean,
bit about that?
Pagliacci is a no-brainer because it's a
Right.
show about circus performers, so that was easy. We had jugglers,
Yeah.
so that was fantastic. People that are walking on stilts and clowns and just a big spectacle in the middle of the pandemic. Now, what was great about those jugglers and clowns is that opera is grand entertainment. And when you strip it away from chorus and from the grand scale of it, it can be tricky. It's not meant to be absolutely an intimate art form. And so how do you do that when you have certain safety regulations that you have to contend with? And our solution was not only those jugglers, but also a collaboration with the Center of Puppetry Arts, because to operate puppeteers
Mhm.
And puppets is much safer than having singers singing at each other. So for example, Pagliacci has a whole commedia sequence in Act 2. And instead of having physical comedy between singers that we wanted to keep divided from each other, we had their alter ego in puppets while the singers
Wow.
were isolated in their vinyl cubes.
Wow. That's really great creativity. Amazing. So the big question, of course, then becomes, what were the financial implications? In terms of expenses and revenue and relationship, what was your end ROI on this and this adventure?
You know, I think the term ROI is very tricky when it comes to non-for-profit. So you can obviously talk about earned revenue versus expenses, which, by the way, there's direct expenses and indirect expenses, so that sometimes it's hard to calculate that as well. I can tell you the numbers. The numbers were that we spent about $1 million on those two productions, and that the number of people that attended was quite high for a pandemic. 2,500 people saw 20 performances, and it's $150,000 more than we could have made if we had done nothing. Now, the benefits of doing this goes way beyond the earned revenue, because the contributed revenue and the galvanized way in which the community responded resulted in fundraising that is unprecedented for us, absolutely unprecedented. But there's another element here which is hard to quantify in an ROI, and that is that the exposure that the Atlanta Opera got from PBS NewsHour and Wall Street Journal and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and Opera News, and the list goes on, is unparalleled. And that is something that would not have happened if we wouldn't be in that situation. Finally, in terms of digital content, we released those movies. Those movies are now available. Kaiser from Atlantis and Pagliacci are available on our new platform, Spotlight Media, and I invite you all to check it out. And there are now customers, not only in Atlanta, but in the West Coast, in Germany, in Israel, that are now members of the Atlanta Opera Spotlight Media. So I think that the ROI on this goes way beyond the earned revenue part.
That's fantastic. What about your audience? I mean, obviously you had a lot of people. That's fantastic. Did you get any direct feedback from them that you weren't expecting? How was their response overall?
Look, first of all, they were ecstatic to be out, right? Because this is October, November. They have been cooped in their homes for months and months. Live performance is not something that was possible for them. Plus, they had this amazing opportunity to don the wonderful Atlanta Opera masks that we created in the costume shop. And you can see Vicky and Howard Pagliacci donning those wonderful masks there. So there was a great feeling of camaraderie on the part of the audience and excitement to see something live, safe. It felt very safe outdoors. Sometimes it was a little windy, but we gave them blankets. And there was a lot of new audiences. So there was the tried and true diehard opera fans that couldn't wait to come out of the halls to join us. But there were 250 new households that have never been to the opera before. They were drawn in by this collaboration with the circus, with a Center of Puppetry Arts, and by the novelty of opera in a circus tent.
How'd you handle super titles? Was a question we just got.
We projected super titles. we had super title screen, and we had super titles that we projected. Awesome.
So you've got a couple more things about what you're looking at future wise with this. Mark had stepped in and started that question of how you might incorporate this experience or some kind of experience to continue to engage this audience. Do you want to say a little more about that?
Yeah, look, this whole thing came because we developed in the past few years a new program called the Discovery Series, which is doing a bunch of intimate operas in unusual locations all over the city so that we can introduce new operas to new audiences in different demographics, in different geographic areas. So we took the Discovery model and planted it in a baseball field during a pandemic. So we are going to continue the Discovery Series model. It's a great way to connect to new audiences and to new areas in town. Whether we will perform again in the big tent or not is a question, but we have a big tent and we'll be able to use it for fundraising events, for a possible gala, a production, but also there are additional competencies that were built here, and the digital platform is one of them. The audience that we have achieved during this time. And finally, the company of players is a model that I think has some legs in the future. This kind of loyalty between singers, international, incredible singers that make their home in Atlanta to their home company is something that is very valuable for us. Absolutely.
And I think you've got a couple of shots of, that beautiful collection of faces. There's so many familiar friends from the artist world that live and make their home right there in your backyard. I got one more question for you, and then I want to roll forward to our last feature, which is, were there any concerns about noise from people living in the area, or was the baseball field far enough away from the other ambient noise in the neighborhood that it wasn't an issue? And if it was an issue, how'd you handle it?
No, we all got death threats from folks that live around the baseball field. I'm just joking. We had some complaints about it, and we sent some cookies and cakes and invited those people to come and see our performances. The lucky thing about opera outdoors is that it starts early and it ends early, because the mandate for those two productions and concerts was that they won't last more than 90 minutes and they won't have an intermission, so that we could finish at 9 p.m. max. So there were some complaints, but I think that it was resolved, and overall the community around it felt very inspired by this event.
That is just really a fantastic project, Tomer, and it sounds like you all made the most out of learning and forward facing for your organization. So bravo for that.
Thank you.
We look forward to seeing what you guys do next. I'm gonna roll to David, and we'll come back for any additional questions right after that. Let's head to the West Coast and the drive-in. So David, talk to us about taking opera to the big screen.
Hi, thanks very much. Thanks for having us. And it's really inspiring to hear what Julia and Tomer have been talking about. Yes, so, I live in this magical place called San Diego, where the weather is nice, like almost always. So, COVID hits us. We had the most amazing BOHÈME cast assembled that you can imagine for the period that we wound up doing it in, intended for indoors at our Civic Theater. So the impetus there was, how do we create a model where we can actually produce a grand opera outdoors, preserve the relationships we have with these artists, honor those relationships, pay those contracts fully. We have yet to cancel a contract with an artist since COVID.
Bravo.
Yeah, so that was very important to me, to try to honor our commitments to them, also to employ other people that had not been employed, but try to find a way to create a safe method for us to produce a beloved opera, a grand opera, La Bohème. That was the impetus. There were two examples that we sort of looked towards. One local, there was a summer chamber music festival called Mainly Mozart, and they did a series of small concerts in San Diego. I went to a couple of those, 6 to 8 string players, spaced on a stage, masked, 100, 200 cars maximum. But it was that sort of can-do, like, we're going to make art happen come hell or high water attitude that I found really remarkable. So that inspired me, and I thought, well, we could probably do this with opera. And then also the Phoenicia Festival work that had done, I think, a one performance of Tosca towards the end of the summer that was very successful. So those two together made us realize we could make this work. If we could find the way to mitigate the risk successfully for the audience and for also all of our employees.
Amazing. So that's where you started with this.
Yeah.
Tell us about how you partnered with the drive-in, like, and what that, and I'm sure with a number of other folks in your community to carry this forward.
We actually started by trying to produce this at a drive-in movie theater. And we looked at, there are 2 existing drive-in movie theaters in San Diego. Both of them said no, because remarkably, now what's happening is drive-in movie theaters are getting first run of
Blockbusters.
Exactly. So they ability to accommodate us. So we had to create our own space. So we actually zoomed out in Google Earth and we looked, where are the big parking lots? And so we found one that is a sports arena, is where our hockey team plays. And it was not having any activity. So we just negotiated with them. And, safety was the most important consideration. We spent a lot of time, as Tomer was saying as well, with our board and a safety committee, but also working closely we hired a safety officer who was a former Marine who had worked in public health before and was also a former Marine. So like he knew how to get stuff done. So we hired him to be a COVID officer, and he worked very closely with us, with our staff, also with the County Department of Public Health, to have an approved reopening plan and a safety plan that considered the safety considerations of all the different kinds of employees, of musicians, of stage labor, of wigs and makeup, because we had all of that. And of course, of all the singers. We are a union company, so we had to deal with the union considerations and the collective bargaining agreements that we have of the different employees. One fun fact is, AGMA, we are an AGMA company, required that the singers have 120 square feet around them. I think I said this in my previous meeting, but it's 15 feet in front of your mouth to the next singer and 4 feet on either side. So chorus was sort of out of the question for us. Tomer did the recording. We opted not to do that. We actually cut the chorus, found a convincing way to do that, which also brought the production time down significantly. And like Tomer, we were able to produce it in one act, which also helped the safety of our audiences, that encouraged them to stay in their cars. But you're seeing a slide of, we built a stage from scratch, a very large stage from scratch, Just like Tomer, we had the musicians of the San Diego Symphony in a separate tent that was adjacent. It was stage left, and that created, a long sight line for the conductor to farthest point of the stage. But we figured if it can be done in the arena in Verona, we can do it in San Diego. Yeah.
So let me ask you this: did you have you had in that space, you had your singers, you had your musicians in another tent. Were you also recording and the video of the singers while they were performing? And was that being broadcast anywhere, or was it just the audio capture that was going to the cars?
No, we had 6 very large video screens that are on, we rented them from a company in the Midwest and brought all of these out to us, and they're on trailers, and, they ascend up 10 feet high. I think they were 18 feet by 12 was one ratio. But we had 6 of those throughout the parking lot. And so we had 4 cameras live shooting the artists, 2 of them fixed, 2 of them moving. And super titles were on those screens. And then the FM radio was the method that we had the transmission, because the latency issue, if you start to actually have speakers in the audience area as well as the video as well as the titles, we just wanted to remove one aspect of that. So we had a very sensitive, very, very skilled sound designer who was a beautiful mix of the orchestra and the singers actually going through FM into the car. And of course, that was a approved activity within the county, was drive-in concerts in cars in San Diego. So that was a thing that we could already step into. We knew we could preserve the health of our audience if they behaved in the way we wanted them to, which was remain in their cars. It was really focused on the safety of the employees and the singers. For instance, we did not give out a program. We did not give out goodie bags. We didn't want to put anything in anyone's hand. We did have restrooms. We didn't have that many people use the restrooms because there was no intermission, but we had employees there to clean the restrooms between visits if people did attend the restrooms. So yeah, lots of planning, lots of thinking.
Like lots and lots of moving parts.
Lots of moving parts, yeah.
You just identified a number of them, but if you had to, what was there one thing that was really sort of the most challenging aspect of this project that you, after you managed to surmount it, went, whoa, that was something?
Well, I think the live video feed was a surprise to me. Let's just put it that way. I figured it would be sort of a documentary experience, almost like knowing that if you were watching the video, you kind of really wanted to see the stage, but you were too far away, so you kind of would be going back and forth. That was not it at all. The experience of what was on the screen was so compelling and so beautifully planned, beautifully conceived, and very intimate. So I chose, after the first performance, actually it was after the dress, so it was first performance too, to really start parking all of the important patrons in an area where they had proximity to the stage, but also a screen, because I wanted them to be able to really experience both of those, because that's not something we get in the Civic Theater, right?
Yeah, yeah. Now you talked about cutting the chorus, and then doing it in one act. Did you make other cuts to tighten it? And also, in looking at the imagery I've seen from it, the singers are not, we're so used to, Mimi collapsing and sliding down the front of Rodolfo. They're not anywhere near each other. So just tell us a little bit about that in this construct.
So of course, that is a challenge for a stage director, right? And the stage director we had hired is a brilliant stage director, Katura Stakan, and she's worked with us quite a few times, and she was meant to be the director of the BOHÈME in the theater. So she already had her plans for BOHÈME with this cast, right? And now I said, now we're doing it outdoors and the singers have to be 120 square feet away from each other. That should be fun. So what she did as a concept, which worked beautifully, was she set it was a period BOHÈME. So costumes looked like the period. What scenic elements we had looked like the period, but it was set 10 years in the future in Rodolfo's memory. So it was a memory play. So when you're in memory, you can interact with people and they can be distant from you. So it was Rodolfo in his study writing of his memory interaction with all of the characters. And of course, we know that Mimi dies. Spoiler alert if you don't know BOHÈME, but Mimi dies at the end. So Mimi was a spirit, and she was on stage the whole time. You know, she was sort of behind him. So Act 1, as it ends, instead of going arm in arm off to Café Momus, she's behind him with her arm out, and he's on a chaise with his arm out, reaching towards his memory. And it was incredibly poignant, incredibly moving. Yeah.
Amazing. Again, resourceful in
Yeah.
terms of how you approach it. So what was the audience reaction?
We only had complaints about sightlines, and that was it. And, you know, people's expectations when they go to a drive-in movie theater is that you're going to have a massive screen and it's going to be really high. We didn't quite achieve that. So we're going to be doing another one. We're going to be bringing in more screens. So we're just going to be more mindful of that. I think that was really the only complaint. People were thrilled with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I said every night from the stage that as important as it is for us to do live performance for our audience, it's also as important for us to provide an event that is a communal experience for this community. And that is what really people commented about, is about the ability to be together and experience it live.
That is the thing that so many people have talked about, what they miss the most.
Yeah.
You know, and gets to the core of what our mission is. How many cars per night?
All in, well, over between 400 and 500 per night. I don't exactly know the total number that we had as cars, sorry, but I know that in terms of audience members, we're somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 people that attended, probably 4,000, 4,500 that attended over the run. So, you know, you're approximating an audience that feels like a main stage audience for us. Like most companies, like Tomer mentioned, we have a series that's our traditional opera, and we have another series that's the smaller opera. It approximated what we would want to try to service for a larger opera.
Yep. So what were, if you had a sort of a takeaway from assessing your impact, what were the financial implications of this project?
One of the things that I tasked our staff with, which is a difficult task, was to try to create a model that had somewhat close to the same impact in cash flow to the company as it would have had we done it indoors in the theater. So what we had in the budget in terms of cash flow, meaning the impact of earned revenue versus the production expenses specifically, try to approximate that. And we became very, very close to that. Because what we did is we reduced production expenses to the same rate and had some additional contributed support that offset the loss of box office from the people in their cars. We sold, you know, relatively expensive tickets, so we charged per car. So it wasn't like we didn't earn any revenue, but the combination of box office revenue and additional sponsorships and the reduction in production costs from this, had we done it in the theater, it still cost us about 1.1 million to do, but that's a lot less than it would have costed to do BOHÈME in the theater. So that it was almost there. Yeah.
So with that and everything else you've learned about it, what would be your strongest piece of advice to a producer who's trying to figure out whether it's worth it to try to do something like this in the foreseeable future, pandemic or no? It
is worth it. So let me just say that it is absolutely worth it, because you're going to engage people that you've never engaged before. Over 30% of our ticket buyers to these performances of BOHÈME had never bought a ticket to the opera before. People that have come before are going to find it just surprising in many ways. It was intimate and very moving and casual. People could have a conversation with their children. We also, I said this in the earlier session, but we used this as another alternative for people to be able to look at super titles. So there was a lot of people talking with their family about words, which you don't actually do in the theater. So it's absolutely worth it. Be clear about your intentions. Be very careful with planning of safety during this period, but also just look closely at the financial ramifications of it and create a model that works, but it's worthwhile.
Thank you. That's really very, very enlightening and uplifting to hear. I'm going to ask Tomer and Julia to just come back on for 1 second for us. So So my final question for all three of you to just sort of give a little bit of a perspective on doing all of this. You had to figure out how to do something that a lot of people thought couldn't possibly be done, and learned a lot of things and are going to, carry stuff forward. Have you heard from your patronage, your boards, your trustees, a really strong expectation to keep this thing now as you go forward? Or has it spurred them to think even more wildly as to what else we could do? Julia?
Yes, I think more wildly of what else we could do was definitely an answer, because they were very engaged and I think it opened possibilities for them. So that was fantastic.
Excellent. Tomer?
So first of all, I think the role of the board and of trustees is basically to be risk mitigation officers and either tell management and leadership that they're crazy or tell them that they can't just be inactive. And I think that there's a few thoughts here. Number one is when you have to make tough decisions, like the decisions that we made to perform in a pandemic, you don't know all the information that is available. And there's a Colin Powell say that it's the 40-70 rule, that the information that is available to you should be somewhere between 40 and 70% of the total information that is available. And if you're gonna wait until you have all the information, it's gonna be too late. So sometimes you need to make decisions that are tough decisions and you may be wrong. And what I'm very proud about my board of directors, about my board chair, Reese Wilson, is that he empowered us to take those courageous decisions, and we walked into them with eyes wide open. But the underlying belief was that inaction is much worse than action. Yep. And so I'm very happy that we took this action. I just want to finish by saying that don't be fooled by randomness. Like, we got very lucky, and things can go south. Mm-hmm. But the question is, what is the risk that you're willing to take? Mm-hmm. I think the role of the board is mitigating that risk.
Excellent. David?
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo what Tomer said. I think to work with clearly and carefully with trustees and also our staff, I think it's our responsibility as leaders, but also working with the trustees to have a conversation that's positive and to explore the possibilities. And so that's where we started. Was I thought it was our duty to try. Whether or not we were going to do it, it was our duty to try and to try to find a plan and work together to mitigate risk. To the extent as much as possible, then we can make a decision it was worth going forward with. But for me, that was really important. We are an opera company. We are existing in this time. It was very important for us to try to do it.
Really great pieces of reflection and advice and learning. Thank you guys so much. I hope you all found this as illuminating, exciting, and frankly hopeful as I did. Thank you again, Julia, Tomer, and David, for sharing your time with us tonight, for your exceptional creativity and perseverance this year. And we all wish you all the very best with your company's work for this coming year.
Laura Lee, thank you so much for that wonderful session, your great questions. It was wonderful to learn about these projects and to be inspired by their ingenuity and the way they responded to the COVID crisis and still point to future possibilities for opera. Friends, I'm delighted you joined us this evening. Look forward to seeing you again soon for another episode in our Onstage series.